911 attendant Natalie Raven picked up the emergency hotline at the Monterey Park Police Department. On the other side, a woman, horrified and shocked, spoke in hushed screams through the line, as if she had just seen a ghost.
Help me! He's inside my house! Send someone now!
Ma'am, has someone broken into your house?
Yes! He's coming around the garage! My friend and I are stranded! What should I do?
Ma'am, can you reach your friend?
No! She's in the kitchen. I can't reach her.
We're sending a patrol car to your address right now, ma'am. In the meanwhile, get out of the house. And if you can't, lock yourself in a room. What is your name?
Maria Hernandez. My friend is Dale Okazaki.
Officers John Rafferty and Mick Crook, who were patrolling in Rosemead, a mile down from Monterey Park, picked up the emergency dispatch call from Natalie.
Calling all units. This is Monterey Park PD. 307, underway at 21 Pickett Avenue. 2 hostages, trapped inside their home.
Heading there right now.
As the patrol car pulled into the street, officers John and Mick spotted a young woman running down an alleyway. She was bleeding from her arm and looked like she was in unbearable pain. Officer John immediately hit the brakes.
Ma'am, are you all right?
I'm Maria. I called 911. My friend Dale. I don't know if she's okay. I heard a second gunshot. Oh my God, I'm so scared.
Officer Mick immediately unlocked his pistol and started to make his way into house number 21. When he arrived at the front door, he saw that it was partially opened, with blood splatters on the carpet. With his gun cocked, he took the most cautious steps toward the kitchen.
Anybody in there? Come out with your hands above your head, now! Dale, are you in there?
There was no response from inside the house. The eerie silence felt ominous, and when Officer Mick finally reached the kitchen, he was in for a bloodbath. Meanwhile, Officer John's walkie blipped to life. It was Mick.
John, we've got a 299 on our hands. This is a case for Gil. Let me buzz the LA County Homicide Bureau. You think he's up for it? I thought he was done after the Strangler case. He's our werewolf, Mick. He's always hungry for a murder case.
Meanwhile, at a local roadside cafe, Detective Gil Carrillo had just bit into his double red chili burrito and taken a sip out of his double espresso when his phone rang. It was Officer John.
Gil, you still up for a challenge? I'm here in the middle of a burrito, John. I thought you'd pick up the scent by now.
Gil reached for his walkie-talkie and turned it off. The werewolf, as he was known in the LA police precinct circles, was always a step ahead. He had already heard the dispatch about the murder at Pickett Avenue.
It's been a year since the Strangler, Gil. I need you now at Pickett Avenue, number 21. It's a 299.
The last case Gil had worked on had stretched him to his limits, so much that the gruesome nature of the crimes had affected his mind, and he took a sabbatical, just to cut away from the crime, blood, criminals, psychopaths, and murderers of the city. He wasn't even far from picking up a scent.
How bad is it? One dead. A woman named Dale Okazaki. We have a survivor. A survivor? We have 2? Yeah. Her subletter, Maria Hernandez.
There was radio silence for 5 seconds when John spoke.
Gil, you there? Wait a minute. Did you say Maria Hernandez? Yeah, why? I'm on the way.
Gil immediately got up from his chair and headed for the door. He left a $10 bill for a $3 burrito and the coffee, which he left half simmering on the tabletop. He was clearly in a hurry and hopped into his car and then sped toward Monterey Park. In 12 minutes, he was at the address, and upon seeing him pull in, Officer John breathed a sigh of relief.
Okay, guys. Homicide is here. Make way.
When Gil walked through the entrance, the team of officers looked at a man who had put on a couple of pounds of weight and a seasoned investigator who was a legend. Gil immediately started to make notes in his diary. In his other hand was a voice recorder into which he began speaking and documenting everything he saw.
Blood splatters on the carpet and doorknob. Smears on the adjoining wall.
Gil then scanned the entryway to the house and peeked inside of the house.
Looks like someone made a run for it. Yeah, Maria probably hit it after being shot in the arm. Blood streaks all down the alleyway. It's crazy. Where is she now? Downtown hospital. I'll need to speak to her too.
Gil then headed to the kitchen, where the body of Dale Okazaki lay sprawled across the floor beside a paper grocery bag. He kept noting the minutest of details and scribbled away on his notepad and spoke into the voice recorder.
Point blank range, .22 caliber gunshot wound to the head. Instant death. No sign of sexual assault. House ransacked. He killed Dale Okazaki and then attempted to kill Maria Hernandez. But why two? Was he startled by more than one resident in the house?
After he cut the recording, Officer John, who had been observing him closely, approached him.
What do you say, Gil? Let's talk to Maria. She must still be in shock. Imagine watching your friend get shot right in front of your eyes. She'll talk to me. She's my neighbor's daughter.
John was surprised by the twist, but it wasn't big enough for him.
That's not all, Gil. There's been another murder down the street. What? Here? Half a mile down the street.
Gil immediately looked at the watch, then noted the time in his diary and recorded it on his voice recorder.
2 murders, 40 minutes apart. Same vicinity. Looks like a pattern.
Officer John smiled, because he knew he had called the right man and wasn't surprised. Gil Carrillo was brought up in the back alleys of Los Angeles that were hubs for street gangs in the 70s and 80s, and he too had begun to roll downhill when his father had him enlist in the Army, where he transformed himself and returned as a Vietnam veteran. He then joined the Homicide Bureau and turned into a local superstar after cracking a couple of high-profile cases. With a sharp eye for detail and an uncanny knack for picking up clues, he was the werewolf of the LAPD. If you had asked him if he'd be working for the prestigious Criminal Investigation Department a year before, he would have said that you were joking. But as someone who knew the streets inside out, he was the perfect man for the job, meticulous, sharp, and sly as a fox. Gil pulled his car next to a Toyota hatchback that had been abandoned in the middle of the road, a mile from Dale's house. By now, the police had cordoned off the crime scene. When Gil approached the car, he saw that a young Asian woman was lying dead on the road. He took out his torch and aimed it at her face.
Young woman of South Asian origin. The name on the driver's license reads Tsai Lian Yu. Looks like she was pulled out of her car and shot point blank.
Gil then looked around her body when his torch caught a golden glisten under the Toyota. He bent down and pulled out an empty bullet casing that had been spent. He picked it up and examined it closely. He had a smile on his face.
Similar MO. A .22 caliber weapon.
Officer Jameson, who had first arrived at the scene, was amused by Gil's observations. Gil had amassed a fan following of sorts within the county sheriff's office, where having cracked the Hillside Strangler case earlier, and was something of a poster boy for the law and order system in LA.
Do you see something, Gil?
Gil turned to Jameson. He was poker-faced and didn't give away anything. As a thorough professional, Gil knew how to keep his cards close to his chest.
I want to talk to Maria first.
At the downtown hospital, Martha Hernandez embraced her wounded daughter and the two cried, just as Gil entered the room. Upon seeing Gil, Martha got up and rushed into his arms.
Gil, look at my baby. God saved her tonight.
Gil had known Martha and her family since he was a child. The community was closely knit, and everyone knew everyone else. He walked closer and looked at Maria closely. Her eyes were wide open and spooked like she had seen an apparition. She was trembling and had broken a sweat. Gil got up to walk out of the room to comfort her, thinking that she wasn't yet in a state where she could give a statement.
Maria, sweetheart, I'll come back. You know I'm here for you any second of the day.
Maria, who had buried her head in her mother's arms until then, finally arose and looked at Gil. Her hand had been plastered, but she still pointed towards a set of keys that were placed on the bedside table. Gil walked over and picked them up. They had been badly dented by blunt force trauma.
It's okay, Uncle Gil. This is for Dale. The keys saved me. The son of a bitch shot at me from 5 feet away.
What happened, Maria?
I not shared, the place with Dale. After my shift at work, I drove into the garage. Dale sometimes hits the bed early, so I have the second set of keys to the house. As I turned the doorknob open, I heard a huge thud behind me. When I turned...
At this point, Maria's face turned pale as she remembered the exact moment she came face to face with her assailant. Gil looked at her and wondered if she had really seen the devil incarnate. As a Catholic, he was raised to believe in evil as much as good.
You can tell me, Maria.
When I turned, the bastard stood staring into my eyes. His face sort of lit up, as if he was getting some sort of pleasure.
And where was Dale at this point?
I don't know. I raised my hands up, and the next thing I remember is that I ran into the alleyway to call 911. As I did, I heard a second gunshot. I didn't know what to do, so I decided to head back through the front door, thinking he might be gone.
And then what happened?
Maria broke into tears. She couldn't take the horror anymore.
He suddenly came in through the front door and I bumped into him again. I thought he was gone, but he was still lurking around in the dark. He raised his gun at me a second time to shoot me. So I said to him, "You've already shot me once. Do you really want to shoot me again?" And then he smiled, lowered the gun by his side, and simply walked away.
Gil then offered Maria a glass of water and called criminal sketch artist Tom Jones into the room.
Maria, this is Tom. I want you to describe the man you saw, the man who tried to kill you. Be as candid with Tom as you can.
Maria was shocked at the request, but Gil wanted to make the best of the opportunity before she was gone. Moreover, the incident was still fresh in her memory, and Gil didn't want to lose out on details.
He was about 6 feet tall and wore an AC/DC hat. Unkempt long hair, black. His hand had the tattoo of a devil with horns. His eyes were big, wide, and cold. The only time they lit up was when he smiled at me. That grin. He had some broken and missing teeth. He looked ugly, horrible, like he was a mutant or a monster.
Gil switched his voice recorder off. He had enough to work with for starters. As he drove the empty streets of downtown Los Angeles, he thought to himself,
Did the guy come in for a burglary? Is he a pervert who stalks only Asian women? Why kill Tsai Lian? Is he some sort of fetish who takes pleasure in scaring unsuspecting people? Why lurk around the crime scene? Did Maria interrupt his plans of a sexual assault on Dale? Looks like it. If Maria ran into the alley to call the police, was it the second gunshot that killed Dale Okazaki? It had to be. The 22 suggests a pattern. Do we have a serial killer loose in LA?
Just then, Tom Jones walked out of the room.
Gil, you won't believe it. Don't tell me. We found a match. Maria's description matches another on our records.
As Detective Gil Carrillo pondered over the vital details and the modus operandi of the supposed killer, he had no clue that he would soon come face to face with the evil clown himself. Ten days later, on the morning of the 27th of March, 1985, Gil Carrillo had only just picked up a pack of sunflower seeds from the convenience store when the walkie-talkie in his car crackled. Rushing across the road, he picked up the dispatch.
Someone got the Cesaras. Whittier County area.
What? He got both of them?
And a heck of a lot more. This guy's a freak.
Gil had got his cue. It was 15 miles from the Zazara home and well within the East LA patrol station, which acted as his home base. Pulling his car onto the main street, Gil saw a team of paramedics and police teams and instantly knew that it was going to be dirty. Officer Ryan Greaves, who was the first to arrive at the crime scene, looked visibly shaken. He was all of 20 and had only joined the force recently.
Detective Gilbert. Thank heavens you've arrived. Gilbert? No one calls me that. I'm too cool to be called Gilbert.
Greaves could only manage half a smile. Gil instantly sensed that this was going to be a task, even for a seasoned detective like himself, who had been there and done it all.
That bad, huh? Tell you what, why don't you go take a break and take a walk? I've got this.
Greaves looked relieved. That's exactly what he had hoped for, and smiled at Gil.
Detective, the male is Vincent, 66, and his wife Maxine, 44. Is that all? You'll see the rest inside.
With that, Greaves walked away. He looked sickened like he was about to throw up. Gil turned to the house, where he spotted a plastic paint can that had been placed under a partially open bathroom window, and pulled out his voice recorder.
Entry vandalized. No bloodstains on the outside. Making my way in now.
Gil put on his mask and regulation gloves and entered the Zazara home. Inside, he found that the house had been turned upside down, and then he found Vincent.
Execution-style killing. Male Vincent Zazara. Shot point blank in the temple. Probably while he was sleeping. Blood shot out and smeared the walls. He was dead before he could realize anything at all. Bad way to go. House is ransacked, every drawer open and contents scattered. Wallet on the floor, cards thrown out. Cash was probably stolen. This is a burglary and double murder.
Gil walked through the house and then entered the bedroom where he saw Maxine spread out on the bed motionless. He quickly grabbed the cross around his neck and turned around, took a deep breath, and then walked in on the macabre crime scene. This is perhaps the first time he had stammered on his VR.
Female. God bless her soul. Maxine Cesara, 44. Clothes stripped off. Neck slashed. Stab wounds on her legs and abdomen. And privates. Worst. Eyes gouged out. Wait a minute.
Gil suddenly spotted a spent bullet casing and picked it up.
Another 22. Could it be the same guy? But is it the same weapon? There are thousands of guns in the area.
Gil cut the VR and turned to see Coroner Marie Cortez looking at him with a grim face. Gil looked at her and knew it wasn't the worst part about this.
Maxine was sexually assaulted and stabbed there multiple times after.
What the
Gil couldn't believe just how sadistic a human being could get. This wasn't the doing of a sane man. What was done to the Zazaras was rabid, sickening, and hellish. Gil walked around to the side of the house and examined the bathroom window and the paint can under it. Suddenly, his eyes shone brightly.
Bingo.
He quickly pulled out his VR.
Shoe print, size 11 to 12, found in the wet flower bed and on top of the 5-gallon paint can. We're closing in on this sick bastard.
As Gil stepped back to look at the Zazara house, his phone rang. It was Officer John.
Gil, you'll never guess what just happened. We had shared Maria's description in the other patrol stations, and someone has come forward claiming she recognizes the sketch. You're kidding me. I just found a shoe print and a 22. I'm on the way.
Back at the patrol station, Gil filled up his cup of coffee and entered his cabin, where he knew that a witness was waiting for him with Officer John. As soon as Gil entered the room, Gil froze in his spot. He then looked around the room to see 2 more people in the room, 1 man and 1 woman.
Please don't get up, sweetheart. Thank you for coming forth to help us.
Anastasia Peronas was of Hispanic descent. Somewhat dusky, she looked naturally beautiful with black hair and a rounded face, but her eyes flickered as she held her father Jose's hand and began to recount her horrific story.
I don't know how much this will help you, but I thought that my kidnapper matched your sketch and Maria's description. I was asleep in my room. I still remember that my bedroom window was open as it got too hot and we didn't use the air conditioner much. Sometime in the middle of the night, I felt a hand press against my mouth. When I looked at the man, his eyes were wide open, like a monster, and he picked me up and climbed out of the window.
Where did this happen?
We used to live in Whittier County. Now we have moved out.
Gil immediately scribbled Whittier, Zazara murders pattern in his diary and showed it to John, who nodded, while Anastasia continued her story.
He put me in a car. It was a yellow station wagon, and then drove out of the street. He then asked me to open the glove compartment, and I did. and he pulled out a pistol from it and said, "It's right here, just so you know." Then he drove around the streets for 30 minutes, after which we arrived at a trailer with a chain link fence. He then carried me into the house.
What was the house like?
It was dirty, unkempt, cluttered with half-eaten food packages that were rotting and smelled of beer and cigarettes. On a tape recorder, Madonna's songs played on a loop.
What happened next, darling?
He picked me up and started to force himself on me. I kept telling him things like it hurt and asked him to stop doing it. He would stop for like 10 minutes and get back to doing it again. When I asked him to go to the bathroom, he stopped, took me in his arms, and put me on the sink. When I was done, he did it again.
Maria's tears rolled down her cheeks as she couldn't believe what she was hearing. For Gil, as much as this was unbearable to hear, he knew that he had the toughest job of getting as much information on the suspect as possible.
Sweetheart, can you remember how long you were with this man? And how did you escape?
I didn't escape. After about 2 hours, he drove me around the streets until he pulled into a petrol station, where he asked me to call 911 and ask my parents to come get me.
At this point, Jose, Anastasia's father, stepped forward. He had just enough of the torture his daughter had gone through.
That's it, officers. Think we'll end this here.
Gil didn't press on. He simply couldn't. After the Hronas family left, he pulled out his VR.
Survivor account, she was kidnapped from her home and sexually assaulted for 2 hours. The worst part about this is that she is 8 years old.
Murders, rapes, burglaries, and break-ins. Were these all the workings of one man? Detective Gil Carrillo headed home, disgusted with the cases he had on hand. There was a rabid predator on the loose, and now, 8-year-old Anastasia Hrona's horrific account meant that this guy had no morality. He was an inhuman predator, lurking in the dark to pounce upon his next unsuspected victim. Children, women, the young, and the elderly weren't safe from him. Upon reaching home, his wife Martha opened the door and kissed him.
Phone messages from the PD. This never stops, does it, Gilly?
It'll stop when they stop, sweetheart. Until then, it's a race against the clock.
Gil tapped on the phone messages. Officer John had some breaking news to deliver.
After Anastasia, we ran her description with child sex abuse survivors in the area. Guess what? They all have very similar details. Tall man with disheveled hair, wide gaping eyes, broken teeth, black jacket, like a members only kind of thing. Gap in his teeth and pungent odor. Like he hadn't taken a shower for years. Yes, I knew we were getting close to this son of a bitch. I had a hunch that the homicides and the pedophilia had a connection. I'm gonna run the theory with the boss, right now.
Gil called his LAPD patrol office and punched in the extension to Rick Wallace, the chief of the police staff. Rick had almost left the cabin at Whittier County Station when he had to turn around and take that last call for the late evening, which he hated.
Yes? Rick, it's Gil. Why can't I wait till tomorrow, Gil? It's 10 at night, for crying out loud. Because I have a lead, a suspect, and a connection.
This got Rick to immediately sit down. Seniors at LAPD knew better than to cut Gil off. He always had logic behind his theories.
You know the unsolved pedophile cases? Anastasia, Hronas, and the other children in the Whittier County area? Yeah, what about him? I think he's the same guy who did the Cesaris, Okazaki, and you.
After a brief silence, Rick spoke, almost chuckling at Gil.
Gil, we know you're the werewolf, but your boogeyman and ours aren't the same. Let's talk tomorrow.
The next day, Gil walked into Wallace's cabin, where a bunch of officers sat waiting for his arrival. As Gil entered, Wallace exclaimed,
Here comes our werewolf. You need to chill, Gilbert. I told you, our guys aren't the same. Stop chasing shadows. Don't listen to me. Listen to the kids. The kids? They won't remember what they had for breakfast. Just doesn't fly, Gilbert. These kids are victims, Rick. They are leads that can help our case. Sorry, Gilbert. Your theory doesn't fly. We don't have proof. I do. The shoe print and the .22. There are hundreds of thousands of .22s in the LA Whittier area. Do you want us to knock on every door and snatch their guns from them? Moreover, what's one shoe print going to establish? I don't know what we're gonna do, but one thing's for certain. There's a guy out there killing adults and raping children. Precisely my point, Detective. How do you know that it's just one guy doing it all?
As much as Wallace was being insensitive, he was also right. Gil needed more. A solid proof that could establish a motive. Without it, it was a goose chase at the moment. He was frustrated by how a senior like Wallace in the department had scoffed at his theory, but for the moment, he had to wait. 10 days later, on the 10th of April 1985, Gil received a dispatch on his walkie.
This is an East LA patrol station. We have received a report on a car being followed. Station wagon.
Station wagon. That was what Anastasia had also told Gil. He immediately picked up the walkie.
Patch me in on the pursuing patrol car, now! This is Officer McBride in pursuit following a report from a young woman. This is Detective Gil Carrillo. What did the woman say? She said she was being followed by a guy who looked like a tall Mexican. She sensed it and sped away. Gave us the license plate and we're on his tail right now. Oh, wait a minute.
The station wagon pulled into a nearby parking lot and drove around until it stopped. McBride watched the man, who peeked out of his window. McBride then spotted a young woman walking to her car. As she pulled out of the parking lot, the station wagon started following her.
This guy's nuts. He waited on this woman and is now chasing her through the town. I'm taking him in. Good. I'm headed to the station. I need to talk to this asshole.
Arturo Robles looked like a guy who worked at the docks. He had long hair and was somewhat pudgy. As he sat in the interrogation room, Gil entered with his signature cup of coffee and sunflower seeds in hand.
So, you like ogling women? Anything wrong with appreciating beauty? A woman is a thing to celebrate. I love women too, who doesn't? But I don't go around chasing them through city traffic. Why did you hide when the woman passed you? I wasn't hiding. My shoes were untied. You're gonna stay here till you're cleared. We have a search warrant for your house.
Gil drove to Robles' house with McBride. When he entered, nothing seemed abnormal until he slid the bed drawer out.
Jackpot.
Hundreds of pornographic magazines and ladies' underwear had proven that Robles was indeed a sex addict. Just as Gil was about to seal the case with a possible suspect, McBride approached him with a disappointed face.
Sorry, Detective. Maria and Anastasia have confirmed this is not the guy. He's a freak, but he isn't your freak. Sorry.
Gil was frustrated and tired of having chased the wrong suspect. And even though he had put another pervert in Robles off the streets, he still was far from catching the real killer. It was the 14th of March, 1985, when his phone rang. And it was LA country criminologist Linda Arthur.
Gil, I might have some link to the other murders. We have a homicide here in Montebello. The husband was executed. The wife survived.
But how?
She fought him off, but...
Gil knew what it meant. Upon arriving at the crime scene, Gil examined the house. 66-year-old William Doy lay murdered in a pool of blood, while his wife Emily was in critical condition, but alive. As she was unconscious, Gil couldn't speak with her, but as he scanned for clues, something unusual caught his eye.
Wait a minute. Are these thumb cuffs?
Yes. She ripped her fingers while trying to fight him off. The bastard.
What was the link you mentioned?
We had a child abduction case. An 8-year-old girl was kidnapped from her home, and then sexually assaulted at a construction site, and then set free. We have a footprint on wet concrete.
Gil couldn't believe his luck.
You're kidding me.
Here's the photo.
When Gil saw the photo, he screamed in delight.
It's a size 11.
To add to his delight, when his phone rang next, it flashed the name of Frank Salerno, another legend in the LAPD, with whom Gil had briefly worked to crack the Hillside Strangler case 2 years ago. He immediately picked up the call.
Gil, you're making a mark. Why don't we team up? I'm working on the Patty Higgins case. A similar modus operandi. Let's hit the bar and talk this through.
Gil couldn't believe how his luck had turned for the better. He quickly got into his car and sped to Chinatown, where he screeched to a stop at Flora's, a dingy bar that was frequented by law enforcement officers. He entered and saw Salerno seated at a corner table and walked over to him like an excited fan. Salerno got up and shook his hand.
Good work, Gil. You're making progress. Doing the best here, Frank. This guy's a real piece of work. He's evil personified, if you ask me. The Higgins job was ugly. The killer was enraged. He slashed Patty in the throat and then proceeded to cut her up like a stuffed animal. Sorry, this is not all. We've had 2 more murders in the vicinity in 3 days. It's crazy. It's like a man-eater that's got a taste of human blood. He's loving it.
Gil knew about the Higgins case. He also hated the press media for snooping around for a little scoop every time there was a crime scene. Later, this would prove to be devastating for him and Salerno.
What's the MO? Male victim, executed. Female gagged and raped, followed by robbery.
Gil knew Salerno too was on a similar track and could prove his theory of a serial killer right, that it was one suspect committing all these gruesome crimes. He didn't have to think much.
I'm in, Frank. Let's team up and get this SOB.
The handshaking was more than a vow of teamwork. It was a test of their resolve, which would be put on the line on the 5th of July, 1985, in the relatively peaceful suburb of Sierra Madre, where 16-year-old Whitney Bennett was raked and beaten by a tire iron. When Gil got to the crime scene, Salerno was already there. He looked deadpan and gave nothing away.
Victim? Lived to tell the tale. 43 lacerations to the skull. Doesn't remember anything after she was assaulted. Only his description. Tall, slender, light-skinned Mexican, disgusting teeth, and unkempt hair. Black jacket. That's the guy.
Just then, the two heard a woman's voice. Criminalist Giselle Levine sprinted over to the two partners, almost losing her breath.
That's not all. Look at this.
What Frank and Gil saw next dropped their jaws. Giselle had a bedsheet spread open that had a full-size and clean, blood-soaked full footprint on it.
Gil, you were right. It's one guy.
Gil's theory had just been proven right. He immediately shared the details of all his previous cases with a similar modus operandi with Salerno.
It started with Okazaki, then Tsai Lin Yu, in the street, and Caceres, William and Emily Doi, Higgins, Mary Cannon, and now Whitney Bennett. I knew there was a pattern, Frank. The idiot left his footprints wherever he went. The PD laughed at me. I'm with you, Gil. Let's get this serial killer.
It was a calm and warm night in downtown Los Angeles, and closing in on midnight when Michelle Knight drove her Toyota down a traffic light. Suddenly, she caught a man approaching her from the side in an orange station wagon. Fearing that she was being stalked, Michelle hit the gas and sped through the light. But just as the station wagon began to give chase, the lights turned red. Officer Matt, who was stationed at a nearby 24-hour pharmacy, heard the dispatch crackle about a broken light and began to pursue the orange station wagon, finally forcing it to stop by the curb. Officer Matt got out of his patrol car and approached the car cautiously.
Too much AC/DC tonight, pal? Please step out of the car and hand me your license and registration. Okay, officer, I want no trouble. That was my girlfriend and she is pissed at me.
Officer Matt grabbed the documents from the driver of the car and patted him down.
Stay here. I'll be right back. If you're good, should be no problem. I'll let you off with a ticket.
Officer Matt then picked up the walkie-talkie and spoke.
I have a suspect linked to the description of the Monrovia sisters' murder case. Tall and lanky, crooked teeth. AC/DC hat, black jacket. Requesting backup.
Suddenly, Matt heard a loud thud behind him. When he turned, the driver had abandoned the station wagon and was gone. Matt approached his patrol car and took back a couple of steps in shock.
The son of a bitch just drew a pentagram on the hood of my car with blood. Where could he have gone? Drive 20 minutes in any direction in Los Angeles and you're in another jurisdiction.
When Gil Carrillo and Frank Salerno were informed that they had missed the serial killer by a whisker, they were livid. In his career, if there was one thing Gil had learned, it was that egos ran high across jurisdictions. He was well aware of just how the A-teams competed with one another for supremacy, and information sharing was hence very difficult, as many wouldn't, fearing embarrassment.
Shit. We had him. Matt had him. Rookie mistake. You should have handcuffed the SOB. That's pretty standard to do so. If you caught a guy stalking a young woman in the middle of the night, that too chasing her through LA, breaking lights while at it, we'll never know how he chose his victims. The houses. We had him, Frank.
Gil bumped his fist on the table, and the two called it a night. Gil reached home exhausted and angry. His wife Rhonda opened the door, but he didn't hug her and crashed on the couch instead. After a while, he sat up to take off his shoes, when suddenly his phone rang. Gil and Rhonda looked at each other, and Rhonda, who had now gotten used to her husband being on duty 24/7, walked back into the kitchen with the coffee and sandwiches she had for him. Gil picked up the phone and was surprised to hear Linda's voice.
Gil, it happened in my street. My neighbor who lives opposite my house has just got raped. I think this is related to your investigation.
Gil just couldn't believe his ears. Had Linda just told him that his serial killer had struck barely 40 minutes after escaping the law? He and Salerno then rushed to the crime scene where they had met a visibly terrified Linda, who sat beside her friend and neighbor, Sophie Dickman, whom had been covered in a blanket. Linda looked at both Gil and Salerno.
Will I be next, Frank?
This was uncharacteristic of Linda, who was well trained in forensics and spent her career with the police and law enforcement. Gil observed that Sophie had ligature marks on her wrist, around which there were a pair of handcuffs. He clicked them open and handed Sophie a glass of water.
What happened, Linda?
We were having a hot tub party at my pool till about 3 a.m. Around 4 a.m., my girlfriend told me that someone was calling me, so I said that I cannot take calls this early in the morning. She then told me that Sophie was calling me over from her bedside window.
From the looks of it, you dragged the bed to the window to call for Linda, didn't you, Sophie?
Sophie just nodded. She had been too traumatized to talk. As the two walked out, Linda patted Gil on the shoulder.
He stuffed a glove in her mouth and pressed a pillow over her head so she couldn't scream. Sophie told me that as he sexually assaulted her, he asked her not to look at him. And when she said she'd swear that she wouldn't, he slapped her and asked her to swear to Satan.
Just then, a deputy came running inside the room. He looked pale.
Another murder. Monterey Park, 60-year-old Colleen Nelson.
When Gil heard the name, he collapsed on the chair. Everyone knew everyone in Monterey Park, and Colleen had been one of the more upstanding citizens who ran marathons for charity and was a spirited grandmother who took pride in being able to cartwheel on her porch, even at 60. At her house, the scene was macabre. Gil pulled out his voice recorder.
He kicked her head in so bad that he left a shoe print on it. No sexual abuse. Burglary, with items gone. Most shockingly, there is a pentagram above her bed, drawn in her blood. Nice trick to create a fear of psychosis in the society. But 2 in one night is challenging us, Gil. Let's shoot this son of a bitch down.
Both Salerno and Gil were shocked, but not surprised. They both knew that they were on the trail of a rabid sexual offender. In the span of 10 days, they had investigated the Higgins, Cannon, Bennett, Dickman, and Nelson crimes, and every time, the killer had slipped right out of their hands. There was more bad news coming their way. Just as the two partners walked out of the Nelson house, they spotted a man with a camera, running towards a news media van. Both looked at each other and knew what this meant.
Shit!
From that day on, the media threatened to expose the investigation wide open to the public, and this was what Gil and Salerno feared the most. In a bid to calm the news channels down, they approached KNBC, whose reporter they had spotted at the crime scene, and spoke with Lauren Waltz, the editor-in-chief of the network, who refused to cooperate, citing press freedom. In a bid not to give too much away and yet give the news-hungry channels a bite, the two agreed to an exclusive interview with the channel. Meanwhile, at a traffic stop in Monrovia, a blue hatchback had been pulled to a stop. The driver was kicked out of the car. Gil and Salerno were informed of a similar modus operandi, a pentagram that was drawn on the hood of the car with blood, before it was abandoned 10 miles away. Apart from finding items that did not match the killer's supposed possessions, the police, however, found a dentist's visiting card with the address located in Chinatown. Dr. Peter Leung had just finished seeing a patient at his clinic when he saw a burly Caucasian and a pudgy Italian walk through his cabin.
Excuse me, do you have an appointment?
Gil flashed a visiting card in Leung's face.
We do now.
After the two gave the doctor the description of the suspect that had been shared with them by numerous survivors, Leung's face lit up.
That's Richard Mina. He came in on the 3rd of July, had an impacted tooth. It was killing him, really.
Gil's face turned white. Salerno looked at Leung and he meant business. They had missed the killer by 5 days.
The next time he comes in, we'll be ready. I'm having an alarm installed here, and I'll have 2 of my Asian officers sit in as patients every day. This guy's got an impacted tooth. He's going to come back.
10 a.m., the 15th of July, 1985. Investigators Gil Carrillo and Frank Salerno waited at the LA Patrol Station, awaiting a clue on Richard Mina, who could visit Dr. Leung's clinic any day. It had been 2 inpatient days which the team had spent on tenterhooks to catch a glimpse of the predator. Suddenly, Gil's phone rang. It was Leung.
Where is your team? Doctor, I told you not to call me unless...
Leung interrupted him mid-sentence.
He was just here. I checked him and he left.
Salerno checked his watch. It was 11:21 a.m. By now, the killer would have gone incognito. Gil slammed his fists on the table and then looked at Salerno, who was looking right at him.
How many more are gonna die?
Gil and Salerno sat at Flora's. All their hopes had just been thwarted, yet again by a cruel twist of fate. They had set up everything at the dentist's office, and still, the killer had somehow slipped their grasp. Gil took a shot of vodka and then looked at Salerno, who had already downed his second small whiskey.
You know, I'm so desperate that even if it takes another victim, I'd take it just to get the bastard.
Salerno looked at him like he had gone mad. And indeed, the case had taken its toll on the 2 seasoned investigators. They had put everything on the line. Gil's wife and kids had begun to really feel his absence around the house, and Salerno, as professional and duty-bound as he was, just wasn't able to get his hands on clinching evidence. Meanwhile, in Glendale, Robin Sandoval had just celebrated her 20th birthday with her parents Max and Leela Needing. It had been a surprise bash organized by the elderly couple who doted on their daughter. A little while after the party, Robin and her partner Kevin drove a block down from the house, when suddenly Robin felt uneasy and weird.
Kev, could we turn back for a sec? I forgot something.
Both Max and Leela were surprised to see Robin, who hugged them both back.
Mom, Dad, listen. Be careful, all right? What happened, sweetheart? Is everything okay?
Yeah, love. What's bothering you?
Just lock your doors at night. You would listen to me, wouldn't you?
Hon, we're from the Midwest. We ain't locking no doors.
Sweetheart, this is a very safe neighborhood. We're all very secure. Now, get going with Kevin. Don't keep him waiting.
The next time Robin saw her parents was on primetime news. Gil and Salerno, both of whom had been drinking at Flora's, were quickly jolted into action. Upon reaching Glendale, they couldn't believe what they saw. As was his custom, Gil pulled out his voice recorder, while Salerno scanned the crime scene with his meticulous eye.
Male, Max Needing, almost decapitated. Execution style with no surprises, 22. Female, Leela, raped and stabbed to death. No other prints. It's the same gun used in the Okasaki killing.
Just then, Salerno came rushing from the bedroom.
Twice in one night. Again. Sun Valley.
This exhausted Gil, who was tired of missing the killer time and again, just for him to pace up his crimes. From murdering 1 civilian, he had now graduated to 2. The partners felt like he was mocking them in their faces. At the Sun Valley crime scene, Gil found the same shoe print in the flower bed. The soil had just been jetted, and Salerno observed that as the killer hurled himself up to climb onto the ledge of the window, his shoe left a perfect imprint on the ground. Inside the house, Chainarong Covenant had been executed with a .22. His wife had been raped, and worst of all, their young boy too had been sexually assaulted. As was his killer's signature, the house had been ransacked and turned upside down. Salerno patted Gil's shoulder, and when he turned around, Salerno had an expression of enlightenment on his face.
Do you see? I see no pentagram here. Not the pentagram, the pattern. This place has given us everything. We have a robbery, murder, and a .22, sexual assault of the woman, and pedophilia. It's our guy. It's our guy without a shadow of the doubt. He did everything in one go. Sicko.
The killer had gotten more confident. He had indulged in everything that he would otherwise do separately. When Gil and Salerno met the wife of the deceased man, her description of the killer was an exact match to the ones given by his survivors and rape victims. With both back on the trail, the development came as a pleasant surprise that was to only last a short while. Both Salerno and Gil then received information about a gunfight that had happened at North Ridge, and the couple had supposedly survived. Upon reaching the address, Gil and Salerno found Chris and Virginia Peterson being given first aid by the medics. Chris saw the car pull in and waved at both of them.
I chased the fucker out of the house. But how? He shot both of us. In the head.
Salerno had never in his entire career heard of someone surviving a gunshot to the head. He was simply stunned that both the husband and wife had survived, and said a thankful silent prayer that they did. Not only were they survivors, but now both he and Gil had eyewitnesses who could recognize the killer. Gil examined the crime scene, where he found a .22 casing. He deduced it had somehow misfired, which reduced its velocity and thrust, and the bullet then failed to penetrate flesh, which saved both Chris and Virginia's lives. It was then that Gil and Salerno's true fears turned into a reality. The television in the living room had been turned on, and the news flashed on the screen, breaking a KNBC channel story about the Needing couple.
Murders, rape, pedophilia, and robbery. Who is this killer who's got the better of the LAPD and is outsmarting them at every turn? Just who is this walk-in killer?
Gil had just gotten home for a couple of hours of rest. He had barely eaten in 4 days and painted the picture of a lost warrior. Catching the killer, who had now been given the name Walk-in Killer by the news media, had proven to be his and Salerno's biggest challenge. At around 1 a.m. on the 8th of August, 1985, he felt like his body was having a seizure. And when he opened his eyes, Rhonda was standing over him and looked horrified.
Gilly, wake up. Something's happened at the Diamond Bar.
Gil immediately woke up, grabbed a half espresso that had gone cold, and gulped it all in one go. The Diamond Bar was just around the corner, and he knew that he couldn't miss any chance at getting closer to the killer. Just as he was about to open the front door, he turned and saw Rhonda.
This is too close. I'm scared, Gil. For us. Our children.
What are you saying, Ron?
I'm not coming till you finish this.
With that, both Gil and Rhonda walked to the parking, where Gil got into a sedan and Rhonda with the kids in the hatchback, and the two drove in different directions. As Gil headed for the Diamond Bar, tears rolled down his eyes. A tough man of the force had finally been broken by a coward who was chased out of the house by a couple that had been shot in the head. Computer engineer Elias Abawath lay in a pool of his own blood. Gil picked up the signature .22 bullet casing from beside his body. Salerno had already sent for the posters with the killer's closest rendition to be distributed across all precincts. His wife Amy was panic-stricken and in shock. When Salerno held her hand, Amy had only one thing to say.
Don't swear on God. Swear on Satan.
10 days later in San Francisco, SF Police Department Inspector Frank Fausen was at a crime scene in Milford, the city's middle-class neighborhood.
Shit. He even ate their food before shooting Peter in the head with a .22. This is cold, calculated, evil. Just look at this crap. Who does something like this?
He pointed to a huge pentagram on the wall above the bed that had been smeared in blood. His junior officer deputy Steve Allen stood confused and sickened to the gut.
What is this guy? Satanist? Devil worshiper? Or a Charles Manson copycat? No, rookie. This guy's the walking killer. I've got to call LAPD now. Who? Do you mean the walk-in killer? He's here? In San Francisco?
Frank was long gone. He called Gil and Salerno and gave them a download of the murder. A .22, shoe print that matched, records, and the same modus operandi. Sexual assault, murder, burglary. Gil suggested that Frank take a ballistics test of the casing just to be sure. Gil and Salerno were on the earliest next flight to San Francisco. At the airport, they bumped into someone whom they didn't want to ever. It was Laurel from KNBC, who had christened the killer herself. Gil looked like he wanted to rip her head off.
You like celebrities? How about I make you famous right now with these two fists?
Salerno pulled his partner back. He knew that news about the case was spreading fast, and that the media channels had been keeping a close eye on both him and Gil, and every move they now made counted. The pressure was immense, enough to crack the best of experienced officers. The two sat in their seats when Salerno spoke.
You think he got spooked with the posters out? Why else would he do it 500 miles away from LA?
The killer had spread an interstate wave of terror that threatened to shake the public trust in law enforcement. With the media closing in on every possible bite, the two were in for the shock of their lives upon landing in San Francisco.
What the hell?
Salerno and Gil were shocked to see the airport chock-a-block with media personnel and camera crews.
Who invited these clowns?
Just then, the two turned to the TV sets installed in the lounge. The mayor of San Francisco, Emily Clark, had just made a startling press conference where she had leaked the killer's looks, his style of killing, his choice of weapon, and modus operandi to the general public.
Fuck. This is information only about the killer and we know. Now the whole world knows it too.
Any hopes that Gil and Salerno had to crack this case sank there and then, because both knew that even the walking killer would be watching the press leak too, perhaps with a cracked, evil smile spread across his cheeks. Say it. I am the walking killer. Say it, bitch. Camilla saw the fires of hell in the eyes of her rapist, who had just murdered her fiancé Bill Cairns in the city of Mission Viejo. Gil got news of the killing and shared it with Salerno.
Day 160 since it all started. The murderous SOB just doesn't stop. Something's gotta give. How about the kid? What's his name? Romero?
James Romero was 14 and was working on greasing his bike when the gunshot scared him and he ran back into his house. He would later tell the police that he had seen an orange station wagon drive into the street and slow down near the victim's house. This was followed by a gunshot, 30 minutes after which the car drove out the same way it had come in. But could a teenager's account be taken seriously?
Anybody saying anything to get 2 minutes of TV time, suddenly everybody's a hero. And everybody's a villain. We're chasing shadows, Frank.
Just then, Salerno's phone rang up.
Salerno, LAPD.
We have information about the orange station wagon. A man named Chris McKenzie has claimed that it was his friend's car that was found abandoned near a dentist's office in Chinatown.
The news raised both Gil and Salerno's eyebrows. Could it be that the walking killer was back for an appointment? But first, they had to make sure that the information matched teenager James Romero's eyewitness account. Gil and Salerno met James at his house, which was opposite the crime scene. Gil handed him a soda and a hamburger, along with a candy bar.
You're brave, buddy. Tell us everything you know. I remember it clearly. It was an orange Toyota station wagon. Good kid. You remember the make? Do you remember the license plate number 2? Yeah, it was 482 RTS.
Salerno quickly called the impound to confirm the plate number before it was crushed. When he put the phone down, he gave James a tight hug.
You little genius. What happened? They found the fingerprints on the rearview mirror.
Following the startling revelation by eyewitness James Romero, the fingerprints extracted from the car were immediately sent out for analysis.
We just received information from a woman named Pamela, who claims her father, Carl, thinks that he met a man at the Greyhound bus station yesterday evening, and thinks it's the walk-in killer.
This was the dispatch Gil and Salerno had been waiting for. Both crashed to their seats and let out a loud chuckle. It was unbelievable news. Salerno composed himself and spoke into the talkie.
Is there anything else? Anything at all?
Suspect called himself Rick Mina, and bragged about a murder he had committed in Monterey Park. He also sold Carl a .22, which he said he had bought in El Paso from some LAPD police informant.
Gil couldn't hold his excitement and jumped in like a school kid in an amusement park.
Go on. I know there's more.
Yes. Carl told his daughter that Rick was tall, lanky, fair-skinned, stained teeth, black eyes, black jacket, AC/DC hat.
Salerno and Gil knew the rest. They immediately spread the news about 22 with their network of informers. Within 40 minutes, they were headed to Glendale, where Armando Suarez was packing up. In the evening, the patrol car pulled in just as Armando's fiancée, Rose, pulled it out of the garage. Armando looked at Gil and Salerno like he was facing death and made a run for it. He was knocked down by Deputy Chris Reeves, who was in civilian clothes, and handcuffed him and brought him to face the two partners.
Recognize this?
Gil flashed the .22 in Armando's face, which Reeves had confiscated earlier from Carl.
I ain't helping you pigs. Do it the easy way or we'll make you see your own ass, Armando. What was the guy's name? Who did you sell this gun to in El Paso?
After a couple of well-knocked jabs on the face, Armando finally lifted his hands up to cover his bloodied nose and screamed.
Richard Ramirez. His name is Richard Ramirez.
The 12-year-old boy trembled as his father snapped out his leather belt and whipped him on the back mercilessly. His screams would not be heard for miles around the dilapidated house that was located in the dry expanse of El Paso. The belting had been ruthless to a point where the boy didn't feel pain anymore. He simply drifted away to unconsciousness, and when he woke, the scene in front of him scarred him for life. He had been tied to a cross in the middle of the night in a cemetery. His father was long gone and had probably left him to die. But instead of crying and yelping in pain, the boy shockingly smiled. He had already seen his cousin decapitate his wife in front of his eyes, and also heard horrific accounts of brutality from the Vietnam War from his other relatives who had served there. So this new brutality wasn't new to him. He had been institutionalized. Los Angeles librarian Brett Potter was having a hot dog at the stand when he picked up the daily newspaper. When he saw the front page headline, he was so shocked that his dog fell on the ground, and he made a dash for the payphone. Back at the Los Angeles patrol station, the phones rang incessantly, with hundreds of reports coming of sightings of the walk-in killer. After answering 350 hoax calls, Gil and Salerno almost gave up when the phone rang again.
Toss a coin? Sounds about right. I call heads.
It was tails. Gil picked up the phone and heard Brett Potter's frantic voice.
The guy came in last week asking for horoscope and books on torture. I saw his face in the newspaper today. It was him. He mentioned he was going to take the 6 p.m. Greyhound to San Francisco tomorrow evening. Look, I don't want any trouble for my family. I only want to help the citizens. How do we know you ain't a wise ass? You're saying he's going to be at the Greyhound station tomorrow evening? Tell you what, come with us and identify him.
After a brief silence, Brett spoke.
I have an 8-year-old daughter at home. I'll be there.
Just then, a deputy came in and made another announcement.
They found 8 matches to the rearview fingerprints. Here's the list of names. Gil started to read the names, but stopped at number 2. What happened? Number 2, Richard Mina, 98% match.
It was really him. After following an exhausting blood-soaked trail of killings and fear, Gil and Salerno had finally zeroed in on the man they suspected was none other than the walk-in killer. The scene was set for the endgame. It was time to capture the predator. The next morning, officers in civilian clothing were set at the strategic entry and exit points to the Greyhound bus station. Nothing skipped the team's eyes as Gil and Salerno made sure that they had everything they needed to apprehend Richard Mina. Librarian Brett Potter had told them that he would be leaving LA in the evening, but the team had been put into action right from the morning, given the killer's erratic and unpredictable behavior. As the clock struck 5:30, everyone was on their toes. Gil and Salerno, who both spoke with each other via radio, were just as nervous as they were excited. The hunt was now on.
Are we all set? All units, stay sharp. We need this guy alive. But if push comes to shove, you all know what to do. Shoot him in the leg and take him down. This guy is extremely dangerous, so approach with caution.
As Gil scanned the bus station from a high vantage point, he suddenly realized that the rear entry had been left vacant. Suddenly, he got up and began to rush to the location, startling his young Deputy Willis.
Sir, what are you doing? You'll jeopardize the whole mission. Following my hunch, kid. Someone has got to cover the gap. But the entry is in this direction. He will be taking the bus from here.
Gil didn't stop. He had suddenly felt an instinct that the killer will literally walk from the rear entryway. Salerno spotted him and yelled on the radio.
Fuck, Gil. What are you doing?
Just as Gil approached the rear entry, he saw an inbound Greyhound bus pull to a stop. The nameplate on the bus said San Francisco to Los Angeles. When Gil carefully scanned the windows of the bus, he spotted what he thought was a man wearing an AC/DC hat. As Gil turned around and waved at Salerno and then spoke, the man spotted Gil and immediately got off the bus.
Frank, he isn't leaving LA. He's returning to LA. I just spotted the AC/DC hat. All units on suspect now.
The killer had recognized the presence of the police in plain clothing and suddenly made a run for it. Salerno spotted him run across the road and hop over the divider.
Did he just run onto the speeding freeway? This guy is bonkers.
As the suspect ran, he suddenly pulled over the car and tried to carjack it, unable to do it. He then ran to the next immediate street, a lower middle-class neighborhood.
I need a chopper on this guy now.
As the television screens flashed breaking news of the suspect running amok in the streets, he suddenly tried to pull over another car, but was overpowered and punched in the face. Startled, he then ran deeper into the street, where a mob had already gathered to take him down. The walk-in killer had been walked in by an angry crowd of civilians who were vying for his blood. It was the walk-in killer, the same murderer, rapist, burglar, and pedophile that had destroyed the lives of many families and ended their hopes and dreams. As he ran deeper into the crowd, suddenly he felt a heavy thump on the back of his head that knocked him out completely. Gil and Salerno rushed to the scene, where a young deputy had already stood guard between the suspect and the bloodthirsty crowd who wanted to kill him. Frank Salerno walked over to the man, who was bleeding from his neck in a black t-shirt, while Gil Carrillo handcuffed him and pushed him into the back seat of the car. Salerno sat with him and looked him in the eye.
What's your name? Richard Ramirez. It's me. I did it all.
It was all over. The man who had killed, pillaged, and raped his way through downtown Los Angeles now looked like a lynched skunk, who avoided looking into the media cameras, all of which hounded the patrol car. In 15 minutes, Gil and Salerno had brought an end to the reign of terror. It was now time for Richard Ramirez, the walk-in killer, or the Night Stalker, or the Valley Intruder, to pay for his crimes. Back at the station, Ramirez was lined up with the 7 other suspects whose fingerprints had matched those found at the crime scenes. As Ramirez started on through the glass pane, a sight worse than his nightmares opened in front of him, when 8-year-old Anastasia walked on into the light, accompanied by Gil, whom she called her teddy bear.
Sweetheart, look now, don't be afraid, we've got him. Just tell us who it is from these 8 men.
Anastasia looked at all 8 men, but her gaze locked on one particularly lanky individual. She turned to Gil and tugged at his finger.
Do I write the word 2 or the number 2?
This was how one of the worst criminals in the history of the modern world was caught and identified. But his sentencing was yet another uphill climb for investigators Gil Carrillo and Frank Salerno. In the next 5 years, what followed was a courtroom circus, with Ramirez playing to the crowds while on death row. In a daring show of belligerence, Ramirez would even shamelessly go on to show off a pentagram drawn on his palm, and on one infamous occasion that has now become his calling card, he left the courtroom hailing Satan. As the court reported every minute development of the court procedure, hundreds of women also sent Ramirez their naked photographs, with some even attending the sessions, perhaps unbeknownst to the fact that to him, they were pieces of meat to be devoured. On the 20th of September 1989, Ramirez was found guilty of all charges, 43 in all. That included 13 counts of murder, rape, and armed robbery. Richard Ramirez spent another 2 decades on death row until on the 7th of June 2013, he died of natural causes in his cell. Even today, there are countless articles, blogs, books, films, TV shows, and documentaries that tell the story of the merciless, bloodthirsty, and sexually perverted Richard Ramirez, the walk-in killer.